Hello, everyone. Welcome to Celsius 233, your go-to place for fiction book summaries. Today, we will embark on a journey through Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Planet of the Damned is a science fiction novel by Harry Harrison, first published in 1962. The story revolves around Brion Brandd, a resident of the harsh, icy planet Anvhar. The narrative explores Brion's journey from being the victor of an intense competition called the Twenties to confronting a dire situation on the hostile desert world of Dis. The tale is set in a universe where survival often hinges on physical and mental prowess, and civilizations clash in their pursuit of survival and dominance. Plot summary: Brion Brandd stood alone on the ice-covered plains of Anvhar, the weight of his recent victory still settling in. The Twenties, a grueling contest of mental and physical prowess, had come to an end. For most on this frigid planet, winning the Twenties was the pinnacle of achievement, a lifelong dream realized. But for Brion, the victory felt strangely hollow, like a question waiting for an answer. His eyes drifted over the icy horizon, seeking something he couldn't name, a purpose beyond the contests and the acclaim of his fellow Anvharians. That purpose arrived in the form of Eichel, a former Twenties champion who now worked for the shadowy Cultural Relationships Foundation. Eichel came with a proposition, one that would take Brion far from the icy comfort of his home planet to the fiery, deadly world of Dis. Nijord, a neighboring planet, was facing an existential threat from the inhabitants of Dis. The Disans had obtained cobalt bombs and were prepared to launch them, demanding the unconditional surrender of Nijord. The deadline was imminent, and the stakes were nothing less than the survival of millions. Intrigued and compelled by Eichel's urgency, Brion agreed to join the mission. He realized that his victory in the Twenties had merely prepared him for this greater challenge. The Foundation believed that Brion's unique empathetic abilities, honed during the intense competitions of Anvhar, could make a difference on Dis. It wasn't just about stopping a war. It was about understanding why the Disans, a seemingly primitive and hostile people, were willing to obliterate themselves and another world in the process. Dis was unlike anything Brion had ever experienced. Where Anvhar was cold and harsh, Dis was a furnace. The sun beat down on a landscape of burning sand and jagged rock, a world where survival was a daily battle against the elements. The Disans had adapted to their environment in ways that bordered on the miraculous, their bodies and minds hardened by generations of struggle. Their skin was tough and leathery, their eyes shielded against the searing light, and they moved with a wary, predatory grace that spoke of constant vigilance. Brion, along with Eichel and the exobiologist Lemurs, who joined them later, found themselves in the midst of a complex and dangerous situation. The Disans were not just hostile to outsiders, they were hostile to life itself, a reflection of their brutal environment. Every encounter with the natives was fraught with danger. They carried strange, primitive weapons and tools that hinted at a society built on survival and violence. They spoke in a guttural, half-swallowed language that seemed more suited to threats than conversation. Lemurs brought a scientific eye to the mission, but even she was baffled by what she saw. The Disans had developed a symbiotic relationship with their world, a complex web of interactions that allowed them to survive where no one else could. But this symbiosis had come at a cost. Their bodies had changed to store water, withstand the heat, and extract nutrients from the sparse environment. Their minds, too, had adapted, becoming as harsh and unforgiving as the desert they called home. As Brion and his team delved deeper into the Disan culture, they discovered that the hostility towards Nijord was not born out of a simple desire for conquest or power. It was something far deeper, a collective madness brought on by generations of isolation and fear. The Disans believed that any contact with the outside world would bring ruin upon them. They saw the Nijorders as a direct threat to their way of life, an intrusion that would destroy the delicate balance they had achieved with their environment. Eichel had warned Brion that this mission would be dangerous, but the reality surpassed all expectations. Dis was a world teetering on the edge of self-destruction, and its people were more than willing to take Nijord down with them. Eichel, the tough, pragmatic leader, soon met his end in a confrontation with the Disans, leaving Brion and Lee to continue the mission alone. His death underscored the seriousness of their situation. They were outsiders in a world that despised outsiders, trying to prevent an apocalypse that seemed inevitable. Brion's empathetic abilities, which had served him so well in the 20s, became his greatest asset on Dis. He began to understand the Disans in a way that no one else could. He felt their fear, their rage, their determination to remain untouched by the galaxy beyond their burning sands. It wasn't just about stopping the bombs, it was about reaching into the heart of a culture and finding the humanity buried beneath layers of adaptation and survival. The days turned into a frantic race against time. Brion and Lee searched for the bombs, trying to locate them before the Disans could launch their devastating attack. But the real challenge lay in changing the Disans' mindset. Brion used his empathy to connect with their leader, an effort that required him to go beyond language and logic to reach a place of shared understanding. He conveyed the futility of their plan, the destruction it would bring not just to Nijord, but to Dis itself. It was a dangerous gambit, one that could have ended in his death, but in the end, it worked. The Disans agreed to dismantle their weapons, to explore a different future, one that involved cooperation rather than annihilation. It was a tenuous peace, fragile and uncertain, but it was a beginning. Brion realized that his victory on Anvhar had been merely a prelude to this moment. True success was not about personal triumph, but about using one's abilities to make a difference in the lives of others. It was a lesson he had learned in the harsh desert of Dis, a world that had tested him to his limits and beyond. Brion Brandd returned to Anvhar not as a victor of the 20s, but as a man who had discovered a greater purpose. He had faced the unknown, bridged the gap between two worlds, and averted a catastrophe. And in doing so, he had found the answer to the question that had haunted him since his victory in the 20s. The real challenge was not in winning, but in understanding, in reaching out to others and making a difference in a universe filled with conflict and fear. This was just one chapter in Brion Brandd series. If you want more, check out the rest of the series by Harry Harrison. Details are below or on Celsius 233. Remember, while our summaries capture the essence, they can never replace the full experience of reading the book. If this summary intrigued you, consider diving into the complete story, buy the book, and immerse yourself in Harry Harrison's original work. Bye-bye, take care, have fun.